What is up, guys? It's the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and today I'm back to talk about Warhammer 40K. In this one, we're going over what happens when the Iron Warriors invade a planet. Is the civilian population completely wiped out? Are they taken as slaves, or worse? So without further ado, let's dive into this terrifying 40K lore. Days and nights blurred together into one long nightmarish pained existence. Varnus was plucked from death, and his wounds had been tended by the horrific surgeons that served the Chaos Legion, even as he fought against their administrations. They had borne him from where he had lain after the Chaos Lord had hurled him off the battlements, and placed him on an icy steel slab. He was restrained with thick binding cords of sinew, bladed arms cut into him, and long needle-tipped proboscises had been plunged into his flesh. He screamed in agony as the skin and muscles of his shattered leg and arm were peeled back and the splintered bones reset before being sprayed with a burning liquid. His veins burned with serums, and his eyes were held open with painful spider-legged apparatuses. For what purpose, he knew not, unless it was for him to witness the infernal surgeons at work. The skin of his forehead was delicately peeled back from his skull, and a burning piece of dark metal in the barbed shape of an 8-pointed star was inserted there before the skin returned to its position and stapled back into place. A collar of metal, the color of blood, was wrapped around his neck and soldered shut. He was taken to join the tens of thousands of other slaves that the Chaos Forces had rounded up. Heavy spiked chains connected Varnus's collar to 2 other slaves. They too bore the mark of chaos beneath their red raw flesh of their foreheads. He had found that within a few days he was able to walk, albeit with considerable difficulty and pain. He was made to work day and night, his efforts directed by horrifying hunched overseers, garbed in skin-tight black oily fabric. The faces of the overseers were thankfully obscured by the same black material, though how the creatures were able to see was beyond him. Grilled Vox blasters were positioned where the creature's mouth should be, and their fingertips ended in long needles. Varnus had felt the pain of those needles when he had stumbled one night, and the pain that they caused was far in excess of what he imagined a slaver's whip would deliver. The overseers stalked along the lines of the slaves, their hunchbacked gait bobbling and awkward. But far more terrifying than the overseers were the Chaos Space Marines. Whenever Varnus glimpsed one of them, he was overwhelmed by the scale of the monsters and their pure aura of power and dread that they exuded. The sense of oppression was never lifted. For days, the sky was largely obscured by the immense shape of a titanic chaos battle barge hanging in low orbit, plunging most of the city into darkness. Enormous landing craft were in constant movement between the chaos ship and the ground, ferrying Emperor knew what down to the planet. Then one day, it was gone. Not being able to see the battle barge of the Chaos Forces in the atmosphere was a small blessing amid the horror of that of Varnus's existence. The great red planet of Corsus could be seen both day and night, getting increasingly larger as its orbit drew ever closer to Tanakreg and the time system's conjunction of planets. Varnus had watched as an area somewhere in the region of 100 city blocks was leveled by heavy siege ordnance. In a short fury of brutal devastation, hundreds of buildings had been demolished with the ground shaking. Dust had been rushed across the landscapes for hundreds of kilometers all around. He could no longer tell if it was day or night, for the air was thick with dust and foul, heavy black smoke that left a residue on every surface. Giant smoking infernal machines had been brought in to push aside the debris of the demolition, and along with thousands of slaves, Varnus had been forced to follow in the wake of these mechanical beasts, clearing away the small rubble that the machines had missed. His hands bled, and the surgeons moving through the lines of changed Imperials had sprayed them with a dark synthetic coating, stemming the bleeding but not the pain. Monstrous polluting factories, foundries, and forges were constructed, vast vile places filled with acrid black smoke, heat, and the screams of those being encouraged by the overseers and their needle-like hands. Titanic vats of superheated molten rock were fed with the rubble of the demolished buildings, and what looked like bricks, though bricks of an insanely large scale, were being created in gigantic black metal molds. The corpses of those killed in the defense of Shinar were dumped in a giant stinking pile, and more bodies were pushed there by huge bulldozers, black smoke belching from the racks of exhausts. Varnus thanked the Emperor that he had not been assigned to one of the slave gangs forced to strip those corpses naked before they were deposited in vast silos. He had no wish to learn what abhorrence the enemy had planned for the bodies. Other worker teams were busy in the center of the vast open space that had been cleared, working with smoke-belching machinery, drilling down into the earth, creating a vast hole over a kilometer wide that sank lower and lower into the planet's crust with each passing day. The destruction of the city was not, it seemed, complete, and on what Varnus guessed was the second week of hell, more demolitions began. The rubble created from demolitions were brought upon the smelteries in cavernous vehicles and upon the backs of thousands of slaves. Varnus completely lost track of time as he dragged and hauled twisted metal, chunks of rockcrete, and stone to these smelteries, there to be turned into ever more giant blocks. A sudden weight pulled at the collar around Varnus's neck, and he was hauled back a step, almost dropping a chunk of rock that he was bearing. He tried to keep moving, but there was a dead weight on the chain attached to his collar. As he glanced around fearfully, trying to see if there was an overseer nearby, but he saw none. He turned around and saw that the man behind him had fallen. Swearing, Varnus dropped the stone he carried to the ground and hobbled to the fallen slave, trying to pull him to his feet. "Get up, damn you," he swore. The punishments extracted upon the entire worker gang, if one of their number slowed their progress, were indeed harsh. "By the Emperor, man, get up!" Sudden racking pain jolted through his nervous system as he heard the rasping voice of an overseer. There was a slight delay as whatever foul language the overseer spoke was translated into Low Gothic by its vox blaster. "Speak not the name of the accursed one," rasped the overseer, and slammed another handful of needles into Varnus's lower back. He had never felt such pain in his life, would not even have been able to conceive of such agony. He convulsed and jerked to the ground. Abruptly, the pain ceased, leaving him feeling numb. The overseer called out something in its own rasping dialect, and another of its kind stepped forwards with a last cutter, as Varnus shielded his salt-sore eyes from the white-hot light. The chains connected to the collar of the man who still lay unmoving on the ground were cut, and Varnus felt his own chain go slack for a moment. Then he was pulled violently to his feet by the chain, as the severed links were fused together. The slave was dead, or at least close to it, and it was being dragged away. 2 sharp notes were blown on a whistle, and Varnus quickly picked up his dropped rock and shuffled to the side of the ruined street with the other slaves of his worker gang. A detachment of blood-red armored Chaos Space Marines marched past. The other slaves kept their gaze lowered, as did the black-clad, hunchbacked overseers. The familiar burning feeling beneath the skin of his forehead itched, but Varnus resisted the urge to scratch at it. He had seen other slaves claw at the 8-pointed star symbols beneath their own flesh, and terrible, painful welts had erupted. A discord, one of the floating monstrosities that accompanied every slave gang, blessed silently for a moment as the Chaos Space Marines had walked by, beginning once again to blare its cacophony of unintelligible words and hellish sounds from its grilled speaker unit. It hovered limply half a meter off the ground, dragging behind it an array of mechanical tentacles as it moved ponderously up and down the line of slaves. The sound was sickening, making Varnus's insides twist with nausea. A drawn-out whistle sounded, and Varnus once again dropped his stone and lowered himself painfully to the ground. An overseer walked along the line of seated slaves, holding a muddy brown bottle with a straw out to each of the men in turn. When it came to his turn, Varnus leant forward and sucked deeply from the tube. He almost gagged at the foul, thick liquid, but forced himself to swallow. He had no idea what it was that these bastards fed him, but it was the only form of sustenance that they allowed. And with that being said, that is the end of this short excerpt from the Omnibus of Dark Apostle. Here we see that just because you're invaded by chaos doesn't necessarily mean you're going to die a gruesome death. You could get put into servitude and have to work for years until you're dead, really. So it could get worse, but still I would take this over being captured by the Drukhari, because there it's just pain non-stop until you're dead. And even then, they can revive you over and over again to just inflict more pain for all eternity. So with that being said, guys, let me know your thoughts down below. Let me know if there's anything else you want us to cover. And as always, I'll be seeing you guys in the next one. This has been the Sound Alchemist, part of One Mind Syndicate, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.